Hi, and welcome to Three Questions with my longtime friend Jack Wang with us. Jack is the founder of Smart College Buyer Program. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Kevin.
So, as always, don't forget everyone, Jack's joining us for informational purposes, should not be construed as financial advice or college advice. As always, seek a qualified financial person before you make any decisions in life. All right, Jack. So, when I think of you, Jack, there's kind of two pieces of the college planning. So, first of all, people want to get in as cheap as they can, Jack. But once you help them find the best way, now the question becomes, how do I pay for it, Jack? So those are two separate questions, right?
Right, exactly. And people don't often think of it that way, but really is, right? There's the whole search process of what to do to lower the cost of college. And that's a whole game. And I say game because so many people think of like college financial aid and college search as a game. Yeah, it actually kind of is. The downside is it's a game you're trying to play that is incredibly hard to win, and that you're as the parent, you might not have played this game for like 20, 30 years, and the rules have all changed, right? But aside from that, it's a game. um, but there is a whole section where it's like there's there's a lot of strategies and tips and everything about the financial side of the search and lowering the cost of college and understanding where you get aid and how you can maximize aid and all that kind of stuff, and how to position your student properly to maximize those things. But just because you lower the cost of college, right, because you were able to position your student to get a lot of aid, a lot of scholarships or whatever, well, that still leaves a balance, right? There's very few schools or programs these days that would give full ride to anybody. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's more like the unicorn out there. So once you lower the cost of college, 99.9% of the time, there's going to be some balance left over. Then the question turns is, how do you actually pay for it, right? But they, like you said, they are totally separate questions, and they have to be approached differently. Yeah, they're obviously related, but they're ultimately addressing different problems, right? And so there's a strategy component to the search end. There's a totally different strategy component to how to pay for it, and people have to think about it in those ways. Unfortunately, people don't really think about it. They usually neglect one or the other or both in many instances. And this is why you end up reading about how we have 1.6 trillion in student debt and some growing number of parent debt. It just, right? If you don't have a strategy for this, you got to borrow, and there you go. You add yourself to statistics.
So, Jack, how has the pandemic impacted cost of college? You see a lot of things in the news about schools having a budget shortfall. Has that trickled down to financial aid?
It does. The pandemic has really exacerbated a trend that was already taking place. It just has really spread it up. So the schools, the Ivy Leagues, the near Ivy Leagues, and the flagships, like UMass, Amherst, right? The schools are really well known both nationally and internationally. What's happened is they've gotten so many more applications, right? So kind of in a weird way, the number of students applying to college is nationally is actually down a bit as a result of the pandemic. Not really a surprise. But the number of applications to these top schools that are known nationally or internationally, in some cases, they're up over 50%. So these top schools, the known quantities, have been inundated um, with applications. So what that means is that at these top schools, there's less incentive to give out aid because there's so many more customers like banging on their door trying to get in, right? So these schools really don't have to give out as much aid as they perhaps used to in the past. So that raises their effective costs. On the other hand, that leaves about 80% of the schools in the country that have the number of applications have really kind of either held steady or in many cases gone down. And so there's fewer kids banging on these doors, which means for these institutions now to attract the students, in many cases, they're having to give out even more aid, which lowers the effective cost. Of course, the challenge is these schools aren't always as well known. Maybe they're not known outside the region, like outside New England, let's say for us, or they're perceived to be lesser quality schools. And I say perceived because it really is a perception. But the reality is the pandemic has magnified this effect where these schools, you can get some really great education for even less money now as a result of the pandemic than you could a couple of years ago, because these schools are now having to do even more and fight even harder to get students get to go there.
But now, what does that mean for families? How do they hear about these schools? Like you said, if you're just not familiar with it, could be a great value in a great school, but if you're not aware of it, how do you find it?
Yeah, so this really goes back to the search, and there's a number of ways. There's different search engines, or working with your son or daughter's guidance counselor, although they're not always the best source. Not because I don't like guidance counselors, but their job is to help your kid get in, not to help you pay for it, right? Totally different question. Um, there are other sources, and working with professionals, try and find these schools. And so, really, to lower the cost of college, that's a game that you have to play really early on, perhaps several years early on, to position your student to find these schools, right? So you know exactly what they're looking for. And of course, the better you do that job, the easier that second question becomes, right? How do you pay for it? Well, if you have to pay a lot less, it becomes easier to pay for it. For the families who wait till the very end, like, hey, I'm not going to think about financial aid till I have to fill out the financial aid form, which is typically fall of senior year. That door, if you will, of lowering the cost of college, that's largely closed, right? Because stuff has already happened. Now you're just on the how do you pay for it, which is still an important question. You can still, pay for things very efficiently without burying yourself in debt potentially. But now families at this point, like, oh, gee, I hope my kid gets like a $50,000 a year scholarship. Whether they do or not is that answer is sort of preordained, if you will. Um, Now it's figuring out the rest. And so, like I said, there are still strategies and they're still important, but these things really go hand in hand. So parents really have to think of both sides of this equation.
So, Jack, how do people reach out to you? How do they learn more?
Yeah, people can always go to my website at www.longhornfin.com. I know my program name is called Smart College Buyer, but for now it's longhornfin.com. Or better yet, people can email me at jack@smartcollegebuyer, all spelled out, .com. Jack@smartcollegebuyer.com.
Jack, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to jump on the show. And as always, thanks for being my friend.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin.